Greetings and welcome to Writers on Writing. I am your host, Dr. Brenda Greene, and we are coming to you from the studios of Medgar Evers College. I am the founder and executive director of the Center for Black Literature at Medgar Evers College, director of the National Black Writers Conference, and a professor of English. Writers on Writing comes to you each Sunday and gives you, our listening audience, an opportunity to hear writers from the African diaspora talk about their work, their lives, and their craft. I am very, very pleased to have with me in this virtual space today, April Silver. Welcome, April. And
Thank you.
Dr. Josh Myers. Welcome, Dr. Myers. Okay. And so I'd like to share with our listening audience some background about April Silver and Josh Myers. And to let you know, we're going to be focusing on a very, very important book, one that I think everyone in academia should read, our general public should read, and is very timely when we look at what is going on with movements, student movements, the Black Lives Matter movements, and the history of movements in this country. Their book is entitled We Are Worth Fighting For, and it's by Joshua Myers. But it also features April Silver very prominently, along with Ross Baraka. And I learned so much about that movement and about you, April. I understand you more deeply now. April Silver is a seasoned cultural arts advocate, a published writer, an editor, and founder and CEO of Aquila Work Songs. A communications and marketing executive, Silver's expertise is in niche media, community engagement, vision planning, and crowdfunding. Silver is highly regarded for her holistic approach to public relations, servicing the communications and programming needs of indie artists to philanthropic foundations alike. Because of her expertise, Silver has been mentioned or featured in Ms., Essence, Ebony, Time, Newsweek, The Washington Post, as well as on CNN, BET, HuffPost Live, the Tom Joyner Morning Show, and many other outlets nationally and internationally. Joshua Myers is Associate Professor of Africana Studies at Howard University. He's the author of We Are Worth Fighting For, we'll be discussing today, and the editor of a Gathering Together literary journal. His research interests include Africana intellectual histories and traditions, Africana philosophy, music, and foodways, as well as critical university studies and disciplinary. His work has been published in Critical Ethnic Studies Journal, the Journal of African American Studies, the Journal of Pan-African Studies, the African Journal of Rhetoric, the Human Rights and Globalization Law Review, Liberator Magazine, Global African Worker, Burning House Press, and others. And his current book project is Cedric Robinson, Black Radicalism Beyond the Order of Time. That is currently under contract. As I said, I was really, really impressed with this book, and I learned so much. And I do think it's a must read. It should be integrated into our curriculum. It gives the history of movements, and it talks about the persistence and what is needed to ensure that movements move forward. And it's a testament not only to Howard University, but to all of those movements that we've had. And so I'd like to begin with you, Dr. Myers. You begin by discussing a history of Black student movements at Howard University. Why was it important to tell this story?
Sure. And again, thank you for having me on this wonderful show. It's always an honor to be in conversation with people that came before me in this work of Black studies. And so thank you so much. I think this book is important because we are in a moment now, and it seems like we've always been in this moment, but it is especially acute now, where we have to struggle for HBCUs. And this book is yet another reminder of what happens in those spaces, the beauty that happens in those spaces, the kind of imperative of love and unity and struggle as spaces committed to Black people, and how that commitment takes different forms. And so there's the history of HBCUs going back to the 19th century as, on one level, bastions of Black conservatism, on another level, as places where we can create a sort of Black, educated elite. And in many ways that those agendas were uprooted by Black people. And so the history of that we mark and sort of continue as our legacy is a history of upheaval. It's a history of trying to reverse, in many ways, the ideas and plans that others had for Black students. And that's really where the history of student activism comes in. It's very much in vogue to start it in the 60s, right? And even when we do start student activism in the 60s, we rarely talk about HBCUs, because the narrative of the 60s student movement is Black students are trying to build spaces within historically white colleges, right?
Right.
But that movement work has to begin before that moment of integration. Why? Because it's the nature of education that students are talking about. It's not the simple access to an education. It's the what kind of education do we want, right? And that struggle, at HBCUs goes back to the 19 teens, if not earlier. The high point in many ways of that is the New Negro movement in the 1920s. There are protests all across the HBCU landscape in the 1920s. If student movement is about integration, well, why are Black students protesting at HBCUs in the 1920s?
Yes.
It's about changing the curriculum. It's about changing the mindset. It's about changing the role that these universities will play in Black communities.
And as I read it, I kept saying, this is Medgar Evers College, predominantly Black institution, because we are still grappling with the same issues that you were grappling with. We're still arguing we need to have Black studies. We need shared governance.
Right.
We need to have a holistic approach to education. So just briefly share, what was the process for writing this book? Because I did see people I know, Akanke, Washington. I didn't know she was so involved in this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's a trio of Black Neoforce and / Howard University Protest of 89 veterans who came to me around 2014 with an idea of doing a foreword to another book that was going to be a book that they were the contributing writers to. That particular process never panned out, though I did write the foreword.
Okay.
But a year later, I was asked to write the entire book. And so Akanke, Washington, Jam Shackling, and April Silver, we had a conversation. That conversation moved towards do I really have y'all blessing? Then it moved towards them giving me an outline of saying, this is what you need to talk about.
Okay.
At that point, we collaborated on pretty much everything beyond like writing the words on the page. And so we collaborated on how to choose a publisher. We collaborated on how to choose a cover. We collaborated on how to market the text. We collaborated on how to get people involved in terms of interviewing. There's no way I would have interviewed 30 plus people without their help. And so it was a deeply collaborative project in that sense, but it was, like I said, given to me, even bequeathed to me, because I am too a Howard University graduate. I not only teach there, I graduated from Howard University. And so I saw myself as connected to them. And so it was an absolute honor to be the vessel through which this came out.
Right. You talk about collaborative project, which really is the core and essence of what came through in this book, about how you cannot do this without others, how you have to build on the legacy of other people, how it takes discipline and the unity and people coming together around one vision and mission. So I want to just go over to April Silver. When you talk about, tell us about how this started, the Nia Force.
How Black Nia Force started?
Nia Force. Well, I'm saying the Black Nia Force, because share with us how you became involved in the movement, and then the formation of Black Nia Force.
Yeah, well, I want to echo Dr. Myers and say thank you, Dr. Greene. It's really interesting to have this conversation with you, because we talk every day throughout the day.
Yes.
And we've been working together since 2002. So, I know your work, and I know where your commitment is and your passion and your leadership. So I just want to echo and say thank you for this opportunity and for everything that you do. And that's with my whole heart. I definitely say that. And thank you, Josh. I mean, I got to stop myself, because if I really wanted to thank you as much as I feel it in my heart, it would be the whole interview. So thank you. But I wanted to say that first to open up my answer to your question. My work in the movement, it's a little funny. It started with Roots, the television show. I think that was 1976, I believe.
Or 77, right?
Yeah, 76, 77. And that was my first introduction into what racism looks like. And it was traumatizing as a child. And it set me on my path about telling the truth about who we are. And I just process everything, but I know it lit a fire in me to talk about the power and the beauty of Black people. And it made me proud to be part of a group of people that were so resilient. Also, it helped me to understand that there are people who have evil spirits that dominate their actions. And in that particular context, it was white people. I've come to understand that kind of that evil spirit, if you will, lays upon any human being, right? Could upon any human being. But it did help me to understand the differences between our lived experiences here as at least two groups of people. But that's what I brought with me to Howard, to put it bluntly, this wanting to tell the truth about who we are and to put our life and our history and our beauty and our power in a certain context.
Fast forward, because I want to make sure that we get to what happened.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
So Lee Atwater, you find out Lee Atwater is going to be on the board. What happens then?
We found out
the Howard Board of Trustees, I should say.
The Howard Board of Trustees, right? He was already on the board. And Ariane Pope, one of the members of the organization that you just referenced, Black NIA Force, came to one of the meetings and told us about it. And that really put us into action when we got insight into who he was and what he did and the work that he did as the head of the Republican National Convention and just who he was as a racist. And that really put distinctly, it put us into action to and helped us to know that we have to take responsibility. Because Josh, I'm fuzzy on this part, so remind me. It was her father. It was Ariane's father who told her, Lee Atwater is on the board of Howard University. What are you all going to do about it?
Yes.
And with that charge, she came to us and said, Lee Atwater is on the board, and my father wants to know, what are we going to do about it? Because he doesn't belong on the board of Howard University. Right. And, not to sound cliche, but the rest is history. We went into action.
Well, let's put a pin there. I just want you, if you can share with Josh, what were the politics in our country at this time? Because it was not only that he was on the board, it's what was happening politically in the culture in our country that made this really so pivotal.
Yeah, I mean, the politics, are, I think now more people are coming into an awareness of them. People are trying to make sense of the current president of the United States, how that historical trajectory happened. And then there's like a new Showtime series on Ronald Reagan now. Like, wow, it
sounds like Shakespeare, really.
Yeah, Donald Trump stuff isn't that new.
It's real drama, real drama.
Yeah, so it's, when the historians have begun to write about the 80s now, and so I think more people will kind of realize that there is a trajectory that is grounded in, anti-Blackness, police brutality, is grounded in American imperialism, wars of aggression, but it's also grounded in an economic philosophy of austerity, of taking from the state and redistributing it upward, right? I mean, that's the vision, that's the kind of image of the 80s. And we know how devastating that was to Black people, regardless in many ways of their economic situation, but for sure, for Black people who were experiencing poverty, right? And so one of the things that became clear when I was researching that Black people didn't just accept this, right? We have, evidence of resistance to it, right? And even among, again, the Black middle class, the political resistance is there, right? Jesse Jackson runs for president, right? 1984, 1988. And then with young people, there's hip hop, right? And so those things really coalesce in this particular moment to prepare the grounds for students in 1989 to be able to see that that the jig is up, essentially, right? Because they already had the political preparation to see that. Now it was just time for action, right? And so just to give you a quick, maybe 30-second background on Lee Atwater, he was in many ways one of these consultants, political consultants who used an image of William Horton, who was a convicted criminal, to instill fear during in an election cycle, which revolved around questions of law and order, right? And so they used Blackness, law and order, which is in many ways connected, to really shift this election. And Lee Atwater was the brains behind it. That really led to the presidency of George H.W. Bush. And so students at Howard came to recognize that. And so to have him part of the board of trustees was in the front.
Right. So April, go back to you. So Lee, you find out he's going to be, he's on the board of trustees. You put into action, there were some principles and philosophies guiding Black Neoforce that helped to put into action a plan for how students were going to respond to that.
We were clear that we wanted Howard to be better than it was at the time. And that's with regard to his philosophy, his outreach. And we meant it in every facet. We meant it in terms of how they treated us. The financial aid situation and the lines and just the operation was horrendous. It was absolutely horrendous. We're talking about students and administrators fighting. We're talking about lines that were just didn't make any sense. So there was a grand level of disrespect that we felt as students from the administration and the operations of the university. So that was one aspect. Another aspect was really essentially is us asking, who are you as an institution that you think it would be okay to have this racist man on the highest decision-making level, entity of the university? Like who? It was really like we were befuddled. Like who does that? And to the extent that one could argue that he might attract money to the university, to the extent that one might argue that there might be some political favor that the university would get by having someone of his stature, on the board. For us, it was, if one has that argument, it doesn't hold any weight because this is a Black institution, and you should know better, essentially. Let's fast forward to the fact that we got him to resign, right? That was one of the key things. We got certain things addressed. We also wanted for the Howard University to have a undergraduate level Black Studies program. It was insulting to us as Black students that, Josh, who was it? Just Temple and one other institution had a Black Studies program.
Colleges.
At the time, it was only Temple that had a graduate program.
Only Temple. Okay, I thought it was another. But we were like, yeah, this is Howard University, yes, the so-called Mecca. How do we not have an academic thing that speaks to Black studies? Again, it just didn't make sense. So that was one of the demands as well. But so let's fast forward past these victories, right? We knew from the moment that the protest was over, work that we did after, for the while we were there, that this needed to be recorded. So those involved had been trying to write this story for 30 years. We had come together 2 years after the protest, 5 years protest, 10, 15 years after the protest to try to get together, to get our notes together. Myself and Cherie Warren, at the very least, we were at all of those meetings. We would meet at her home. And these meetings included the Conke, of course, and Raz Baraka and a number of other people, but we tried for 30 years to get this book done, and had some great movement, and then it would just fizzle because, Cherie is now the principal of a school, and everybody just, life and children and all those things came into play. So somewhere along the way, decades later, we had come together, myself, again, Sherlani Cobb, Jam, and we were, and some other people, Garfield Swaby, who was the former HUSA president, and Ariane had come together to try to write it again. And that didn't pan out. And that's how we landed in Josh's lap. Just that, because it's important that people know that we tried to do this because we knew the weight of it. And some people would argue that we should have just wrote it ourselves and just figured out a way to do it. But we're very happy with what Josh, what Myers did, because were it not for this acceptance, it would have never got what we realized. So because it was that groundbreaking,
right.
That Lee Atwater did resign,
right.
That we had the intervention of Marion Barry, God bless his soul, who saved our lives. As you now know, he saved our lives.
Yes.
We would have been blood all over the A building were it not for Marion Barry, who's now our beloved ancestor.
I want to know, I think one of the beautiful things about the way I think this book is written is that you have something for everyone. You have the background, you have the academic, the scholarship, you have the hands-on or actually what happened and how people organized. You have a blueprint for how you get people to be disciplined and to unite and to hold people accountable. And then you have the vision, and you bring all of that together so that your book crosses different audiences. Sometimes an academic book, you said, oh, that's too academic. But, there are parts when I was reading actually what happened. I was smiling to myself. I imagined April Silver on the stage escorting Bill Cosby off and saying, you have to leave.
We did.
I know.
Exactly.
I know. So I want to commend you for this project, because it's challenging to be able to reach all of those fronts. And I want to ask both of you, from your perspective, looking at where we are now with Black Lives Matter, with the rise of social justice movements, with voter suppression still going on, with historically Black colleges still having those tensions, the two Howards, I thought was very telling. Yeah. What is the way forward?
The way forward is we have to, I think, go back first to look at, where Howard has been. I think there's a lack of institutional memory in place on campus. So I challenge this every day with my students. You need to know where you are. Right? There's a certain kind of space that is there's an integrity to this space, and so you need to know that. And I think we also need to challenge the state. And I think we're in a moment where the state is deprioritizing education to a large extent. And we know when that happens, Black institutions are going to feel the brunt of it. And so we need people who are, in those rooms where policies are being constructed around, what happens to education in this country. There's a student loan crisis that is really at the core of so many things that go wrong in education. And so we need to be advocates for things like free college. We need to be advocates for things where again, resources are redistributed and help people who want something as basic as an education. I mean, those two things, those two places are a start. We need to support Black studies. And I think that's a question of material support for Black studies. It's one of the most grossly underfunded ventures in the Western Academy. We need to ensure that we read Black studies scholars. We need to ensure that we support Black Studies scholars because, as April pointed out, Black Studies was at the core of this protest.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Dr. Myers said. I want to caution us to be sober, right? And I want to say this particularly to the Howard community, because we have a vice president-elect who is deeply proud of her Howard roots. And I'm excited about the possibility of anyone to mistake that, about the possibilities of what Vice President Harris, could bring with her nation at Howard and a part of a Black woman-led, organization that has great. I want us to sober, though, right? I want us to as Dr. Carr has said, this Howard nationalism be overwhelming, and it could help us to not be clear and sober about what to expect. There's more than one Howard, and I think the importance of us holding each other accountable for what is important to Howard and not what is into individual advancement. Those are two different things, and so I don't want anybody to mistake my sobriety and my clarity for a lack of hope, because that's not true. But it's a delicate balance, and I just would like the Howard community, Black people in general, to make sure that when we observe and we have constructive criticism, that formed, that we're sober and clear about what a vice president Black woman can and cannot do, and who that is beholden to. Right? And so I just think that's important. I think we do ourselves a favor if we are level-headed and clear. And we can have joy, but we can, for us to be respectfully and constructively critical as well.
Thank you so much. And I want to remind us that you have been listening to April Silver of Aquila Work Songs and Dr. Joshua Myers. I'm a professor at Howard University. I've written a very, very important book, We Are Worth Fighting For, A History of the Howard University Student Protest of 1989. This has been Dr. Brenda Greene. Please support them, purchase the book. It's something you will go back to. Remember to write me at writers@mec.cuny.edu and come back next week. Thank you so much for taking this time, April Silver. Thank you, Dr. Myers. Thank you so much for taking this time to have this conversation with me.
Thank you so much.
We'll have to continue this. We definitely needed an hour.
Yes.
Absolutely, Dr. Greene.
Thank you.